Hello everyone and welcome back to another video here on the Sports Daily Media Network YouTube channel. Today we've got our Week 2 Top 25 in college football. The AP poll did come out earlier today, but these are going to be our rankings and we're going to keep them up throughout the year. They'll be independent of our college football playoff projections, but here is where we go from the top 25. I'll go through each of the teams as I fill them in here on the Excel. So there you see some of the teams that I have in there with their colors, potential teams that we could see in the top 25. And we're going to start from the bottom. And this week, number 25 is going to be the Oklahoma Sooners. John Mateer looked very solid in Week 1 for the Sooners. They were able to dismantle opponent that they should have, and we've got they beat Illinois State 35-3. They have a big one this week as they host Michigan, who you will see on here later, but they weren't in our top 25 initially to start the year, and they are going to be there after Mateer went 30 for 37. So Oklahoma in 25th. We're going to stay in the SEC, and another team that we didn't have in the top 25 to start the year and went there after an impressive performance, and that's the Tennessee Volunteers going to 24. Their quarterback situation has been very public, with Nico going to UCLA after an NIL dispute, but they look pretty good in Week 1, and this is something that Aguilar is probably a good quarterback for that system. Could see him succeeding there. So we got double SEC off the rip here with 25 and 24. All right, we're going to go to the group of 5 here for 23, and we're going to get Tulane. A 23-3 victory over Northwestern at home in Week 1. Jake Retzlaff is really impressed there in Week 1, despite coming in to the program relatively late, all things considered. And with Boise going down Week 1, Tulane is probably the projected winner of the the team that will be in the college football playoff from the group of 5 so far. We've got them there at 23. All right, let's go up the list to 22. We're going to go over to the Big 12, and it's Texas Tech, a team that sort of lingered to the back of the rankings of a lot of people in what should be a pretty open Big 12. There's a couple teams there. Texas Tech looked pretty solid in Week 1. Morton threw for 200 yards and 4 touchdowns when they beat Arkansas Pine Bluff 67-7. Should see more of that this week as they host Kent State, and they are 48.5-point favorites, so should be pretty good for the Red Raiders there. Things do get tougher eventually. They do finish up their non-conference against Oregon State, and then their first game in the Big 12 will be on the road at Utah, who is a pretty good team also. So we could learn more about them then. All right, up we go. Staying in the same state, but we're going to go to a different conference, back to the SEC, and it's the Aggies of Texas A&M who come in at 21st. They are also lingering at the back of a couple people's rankings to start the year. They did pick up a Week 1 win against inferior opponents. They knocked off UTSA 42-24. They get Utah State this week. They are 30-point favorites. Things heat up for them next week in Week 3 when they go to South Bend to play Notre Dame. So the Aggies will be in 21st for us. Up the list we go. We're going to go to the ACC, and Louisville is in 20th. You don't see them in a ton of rankings, but we put them in. We like what they've got. They have some explosive options on offense, and in the ACC, which had a pretty good week, all things considered, with Florida State and Miami winning. But it's Louisville who does play James Madison at home on Friday night in Week 2, where they're 15-point favorites. But Miller Moss, the former USC quarterback, is there. They beat Eastern Kentucky handily in Week 1. They have Bowling Green before on the road at Pitt. They do go on the road to Miami. They do play Clemson. They go on the road to SMU. So a really tough ACC schedule. We have them there in 20th. All right, up the list we go back to the SEC. 19th, we've got Missouri. Penn State transfer quarterback Bo Pribula looked really good after he was sort of thrown into the action due to an injury, and it looks like they're just going to rock with Pribula from now on. But Missouri has a very tough schedule in the SEC. Things could get difficult from there for them down the road, but a lot to look forward to so far for Missouri. They host Kansas in week 2, where they're 6.5-point favorites, and it's going to be on their campus. That is a rivalry game. Kansas has already played twice. They played in week 0 against Fresno, remember, but a really tough SEC schedule. They play South Carolina, they play Alabama, Texas A&M, Oklahoma, and maybe not such a tough SEC schedule after looking at it, but excited for Missouri and what they can do going forward. All right, up we go to 18. This is where the Florida State Seminoles come in for us. One of the big shocks of week 1 is their dismantling of Alabama. Spirited performance in front of their home crowd. Alabama looked really soft, but Thomas Castellanos at this point looks like he's a pretty solid quarterback. And in an ACC, they could go anywhere. I mean, in terms of schedule, they do play Miami at home. They go on the road at Clemson, and they do have Florida on the road late in the year. So certainly enough tough games on their schedule to lose one or two and still be in college football playoff consideration. But Florida State at 18 for us. Up we go, and here's our first Big Ten team. Got the Illinois Fighting Illini at 17th. A big 52-3 win to start off the year against Western Illinois. I didn't learn much about them there, but Brett Bielema's squad, Luke Altmaier, appears to be in the top part of the Big Ten. All right, up to 16th, we have back to the SEC, and we've got Ole Miss, the Runnin' Rebs, coming at 16th for us. They did lose a lot of talent off last year's team, but they're still one of the top 25 teams in the country there in the SEC. Ole Miss is a team that, again, has a really, really tough schedule. The playoff might be hard for them just because of the sheer amount of losses that they're going to have, but and they actually do play an SEC game this week against Kentucky, so right into the fire here as they're 1-0. Simmons looked really good, threw for a ton of yards in their 63-7 win over Georgia State, but road game here early on. They are double-digit favorites, but Ole Miss coming in at 16th. All right, we're staying in the SEC, and we're going down to the Gators of Florida. DJ Lagway and the Gators come in at 15th in our rankings. Still in that tier, probably above the college football playoff right now, but in the SEC, basically anything is possible with how you play. They will host South Florida this week, and which they're heavy favorites, but South Florida just put a beating on Boise State, who people think is a pretty good team, so Florida might have to watch out there. And maybe if USF wins a ton of games, this will be considered a good win by the end of the year. All right, up we go to 14th. Here's one of our losers from week 1. We've got Notre Dame coming in. Disappointing offensive performance against Miami, but still getting a freshman or a first-year quarterback on the road, C.J. Carr. He didn't look amazing. He didn't look terrible. He made a few nice throws, but their defense will probably be a little more connected than they were against Miami, and they may not be a top 5 team like some thought, but I still think they deserve to be really in the mix for the college football playoff. Big game coming up for them against A&M next week. They actually have off in week 2, so they will be hosting the Aggies. Remember last year they did win at Kyle Field in Texas the week before losing to Northern Illinois. So a couple of interesting things there. All right, we're going to stay in the state of Indiana for 13 here, and we've got the Indiana Hoosiers. Kurt Signetti's team played Old Dominion week 1. Slow start. but eventually pulled away, and then a late touchdown by Old Dominion made it look a little closer than it was. But Fernando Mendoza still getting locked in, not quite as sharp as he probably would like in week one, but they do have Kennesaw State this week, and then a very easy game on the schedule next week as well. So 3 tune-ups really before they start Big Ten play against Iowa and Illinois. All right, down the list we go to number 12. We've got SMU from the ACC in here. Not really sure what SMU is all about this year. Obviously, they did make the college football playoff last year. They were embarrassed pretty handily at Penn State, but the ACC is going to have a couple teams in the mix this year. SMU is certainly going to be one of them. They're going to score the ball at a high rate, and we'll have to see for SMU. Not a team that I have a big read on so far. They do host Baylor in week 2, and they're just 3-point favorites. Baylor's a team that got steamrolled by Auburn on the road, so something to look out for there. All right, up the list we go to Arizona State in 11th. Kenny Dillingham did play an in-state opponent off the top of my head in week 1. They looked pretty solid, thorough winners. I think it was Northern Arizona, but they're probably my pick to win the Big 12 at this point. It's they play on the road at Mississippi State this week. Mississippi State, not a team that's expected to really compete in the top half of the SEC, but something could give there. They still have Sam Leavitt. They should be winning there, but that's potentially a spot where they could trip up. All right, into the top 10 we go. Back to the SEC. We have got South Carolina. Beamer Ball and Lenore Sellers. Really, really fun to watch. Sellers might be an early pick for Heisman for me. He's a playmaker. The schedule is just incredibly tough, which is why you're not seeing them in a lot of college football playoff projections, although I do think they're a top 10 team in the sport. All right, number 9, back to the Big Ten. We've got Michigan. Bryce Underwood and the Wolverines did take a little bit to get going against whoever they played week 1, escaping me off the top of my head, but the defense is still really good. They did lose a lot from last year, but their new running back, Justice Haynes, looks like he's really good. He scored 3 times in week 1, and they will go on the road to our 25th ranked Oklahoma Sooners this week. Oklahoma 5-point favorites so far, so an interesting one there. New Mexico is who they played. They beat them by 17. All right, up to 8th we go, and we have got another loser from week 1, and this is the Clemson Tigers. Lost to LSU week 1 on their home field, not ideal. Gabe Klubnik wasn't his best, certainly, but they're still a really good team. They're still the best team, or one of the 2 best teams in the ACC, I think, and they still have a good shot to go to the college football playoff. The team that they lost to hasn't been mentioned yet, so hopefully for Clemson, LSU can have a great season. But, not going to drop them a ton if you lose to a good team. All right, back to the Big Ten we go. And it's the Oregon Ducks. DJ Moore is taking over at quarterback for Dylan Gabriel. It's still Dan Lanning ball. They're still really good. They're still going to score a lot of points. They're still going to make the college football playoff, I think. And they weren't really challenged last year until the Ohio State game. And I could see them sort of steamrolling some of these middle-of-the-pack Big Ten teams. All right, up we go to number 6, and this is the Miami Hurricanes. Big winners or not big winners. It was a close game, but they did pick up a big win against Notre Dame in week 1 at home. Carson Beck looked very solid. They have a couple of receivers who looked really good, getting serious separation there. And the defense looks like they're actually going to be, not horrendous this year. Their offense was great last year. Their defense was horrible. And even if they could just get to an average point on defense, they should be able to win some games. And maybe for the first time in a while, they are going to live up to their preseason ranking. So we've got Miami up in 6th. All right, and 5th, back to the SEC we go. And it's the Georgia Bulldogs, who are number 5. They beat Marshall up pretty good. Not going to learn a ton from that game for them, but they still have Kirby Smart. They still have a great roster, and they will host Austin P this week. So expect a big win again before they go on the road to Tennessee in week 3. So we will learn a lot more about them then. All right, into the top 4 we go. And the 4th will be Texas. We're preseason ranked number 1 in the AP. They were 3rd for us. They just dropped 1 spot. They did lose on the road at Ohio State. Arch didn't look as sharp as he probably should have, but they still have a lot of talent. Their defense is still really good, so I am not going to overreact to one bad performance like so many others are. I think they're still a top 5 team in the sport, so they're dropping to number 4 for me. All right, up to number 3, we've got LSU here. Big winners on the road at Clemson. Brian Kelly finally gets over the hump of the first game curse. It's been a while since he's won in week 1. Garrett Nussmeier looked really good, and they totally, I wouldn't say dominated, but they were deserved winners in that game against Clemson. A bad call on a touchdown catch that they called a no catch. Kelly, whatever he was doing, erased 3 points with that field goal decision. And then they're just a good team. Nussmeier is a really good quarterback. My early pick for number 1 overall pick next year in the NFL draft. So many good clips of him changing the play, moving protections, and it seems like he really understands the game. So he is up, him and LSU up to 3rd. All right, at 2nd, we're going to go with Penn State. They beat the brakes off of Nevada. Didn't learn much about them. Their running back tandem is really good. Katron Allen, Nick Singleton, and Drew Aller, still a top quarterback in the sport. And then at number 1, not very surprising, but it's the defending champions. We preseason ranked them number 1. The defense really showed out in their win against Texas at home. Julian Sayin looked solid at times, not sharp at others. I think he's going to improve. And while they did lose a lot off their team in terms of NFL talent, they're loaded again. And I think it's pretty clear at this point that they are the number 1 team in the country. So that is our Week 2 Top 25. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.